All right. I think we can get started now as people continue to come in. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on your time zone. My name is Laura Zilmer, and I am a monitoring and evaluation specialist with the IDEAL activity. And with me today is Piers Bocock, Senior Adaptive Management Advisor for IDEAL. We wanted to welcome you to the Food Security COVID-19 Learning event in today's lightning talk, which is titled Adaptations in the Face of Constant Change, Protecting Development Gains and Remote Post-Distribution Monitoring. So before we begin, I would like to encourage all attendees to introduce themselves in the chat box. We would love to know your name and also where you're calling from. Please note that if you have any questions during the webinar, we would like you to please post those questions in the Q&A box rather than in the chat box itself. And all questions will be answered during the Q&A session at the very end of the session, so after we hear from our two presenters. Any questions we don't get to by the end of the webinar will be included in a question and answer document that's shared after the session. You can also upvote questions in that Q&A box, and those will be the questions that we will prioritize during the session. A quick note on interpretation. We'd like everyone to be aware that we'll be providing French and Spanish interpretation for this session. So if you'd like to follow the event in French or Spanish, you can click on the small globe at the bottom of your Zoom screen where it says interpretation, and then you can select either French or Spanish. Once you've selected your language, you can choose to mute the original audio, or you can hear it in the background at a lower volume. For English speakers, please select English as your interpretation language and mute the original audio. If you have any technical issues during the session, please send a chat message to anyone with IDEAL at the end of their name, and we'll do our best to assist you. So without further ado, I'm excited to introduce our speakers for this lightning talk. First, we will hear from Mahlet Woldeabraham on Mercy Corps' resilience in pastoral areas, also known as Ripa, and lessons learned regarding redirected development funds without crisis modifier activation when responding to COVID-19. Mahlet leads the Diversified Economic Opportunities component in the Feed the Future Resilience in Pastoral Areas project with Mercy Corps in Ethiopia. With over 12 years of experience working in the development sector, Mahlet has a wide array of experience from grassroots facilitation of diversified economic activity, primarily targeting women at the community level, to engagement of private sector actors to stimulate economic growth. She has led the facilitation of savings group formation and business linkage opportunities for women and youth across pastoral, agro-pastoral, and urban locations, and has worked on projects funded by USAID, CEDA, and the World Bank. Our second presenter is Nestor Mogollon, who will speak on key lessons and recommendations for remote post-distribution monitoring in emergencies. A few words about Nestor. Nestor is the meal director of ADRA International. He has more than 25 years of experience in international development, design, and implementation of meal systems, and conducting meal capacity building. Nestor has worked with several other donor agencies, including USAID, DFID, World Bank, and others. He has supported different ADRA offices in Latin America, Africa, and Asia in the design and implementation of food security projects and the design of implementation of meal systems. So I'm excited to get started. First, I'd like to turn it over to Mahlet. Thank you, Mahlet.
Okay, thank you so much, Laura. So for the sake of bandwidth, I will not turn on my video, maybe just briefly to say hello. Otherwise, I will turn the video off for the sake of bandwidth. Yeah. Thank you so much again for having me. Mahlet speaking. I'm joining from Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. So I'm here today to talk to you about how an intentional design component of the Ripa program, that's the resilience in pastoral areas, allowed us to adapt swiftly to the COVID-19 pandemic and other shocks in the program implementation area. Next slide, please. Yeah. Ripa is a 5-year USAID funded activity that's designed to build the resilience of pastoral areas to help lowland communities secure better incomes, food security, and overall well-being outcomes in a context of recurrent crisis. The Ripa program focused on pastoral and agricultural households who primarily rely on livestock production for their livelihood and are thus highly dependent on access and availability of natural resources, predictable weather conditions, and access to markets. Ripa focused on, as you can see on the slide, there are 4 major components, and it's focused on the strengthening livestock systems through market-based opportunities. That's the first component. Facilitating access to on and off-farm employment opportunities. That's component 2, diversified economic opportunities. Component 4, strengthening nutrition access and behavior change. And the first component is supporting disaster risk reduction and conflict management mechanisms. As you can see on the map, Ripa is implemented across 3 regions, Somali, Afar, and Oromia, which are located in the east and northeastern part of the country. So going forward, I will talk specifically more about the ability of Ripa program to use its funding and build in flexibility to pivot its activities in a way that allowed the program to address immediate needs through integrated systems-based approach, thus reducing reliance on direct delivery mechanisms and minimizing disruption to the program's long-term development goals. So we can stay on the previous slide. So just to show you, the Ripa cooperative agreement included a dedicated funding for a crisis modifier, which is 7.15 million USD relative to a 24 million USD development budget, which is close to 23% of the budget, reflecting that understanding that shocks, including drought, floods, and conflicts are recurrent in the Ethiopian lowlands where the program operates. Next slide, please. So what do we mean by a crisis modifier? So it's a conditional funding or budget that's embedded within a development project, which are implemented in locations where frequent shocks and stresses are likely to occur. So the injection of such fundings, that's crisis modifier, into a development-focused program in the face of shock, it allows a more systems-based response, and it can support development goals. This is, as I said, particularly important in contexts like Ethiopia, especially the pastoral locations, which are subject to periodic crisis in a variety of forms, mainly drought-prone areas. So Mercy Corps used the crisis modifier successfully in its previous project called Prime, which was Ripa's predecessor, to respond to the 2015 and 16 drought through integrated market and nutrition interventions. So by then, the responses that were implemented were the unconditional cash transfer to households, which were conducted through financial service providers. The second one is emergency access to food and veterinary services through market actors, as well as commercial destocking. So based on these lessons that we have learned from the previous project, so Ripa leveraged its experience, and during its current implementation, we sought a 1.2 million crisis modifier injection to reach 200,000 individuals through a market-based approach in response to the COVID-19 pandemic globally as well as in Ethiopia. So, and also there were additional disasters that happened in the region. Next slide, please. Yes, so unfortunately, due to a number of external challenges besides COVID-19, desert locusts, and flood in the Afar region, which are multiple threats, the program was advised to flexibly redirect core development activities towards crisis responses and was unable to activate the actual crisis modifier because of a number of external constraints. Despite this, we used what we called a redirection in response to both the crisis, COVID-19 and flood. And we applied the lessons from Prime, focusing on market-oriented systems thinking to ensure robust humanitarian activities were layered into development programming. So to tell you what exactly happened and how we did the response to interventions. Next slide, please. So by the time the Ripa project started, which was last year, February 2020, this was exactly a month. So COVID-19 hit in March 2020 in Ethiopia, and it was exactly a month after we completed the project agreement with the donor, and we were in the middle of preparing our project plans. But when the crisis happened, we immediately, the team directly conducted a rapid market assessment to design relevant interventions. And then we submitted this to through a concept note to the donor, that's USAID, along with a detailed budget. So out of the 6 interventions that were submitted, 3 of those interventions were accepted through the Redirection Fund from the existing program budget. So taking you through the 3 interventions that we implemented. Next slide, please. The first one was stimulating offtake of sheep and goats through smart subsidies. So at the crisis happened, it led to collapse of livestock demand and also decreased livestock sales because of falling prices and low demand. By engaging with 15 livestock traders, we were able to reach 1,200 households in Somali lowlands, where we were able to facilitate the sale of 5,000 sheep and goats through the project support, as well as beyond the traders, the 15 livestock traders were able to facilitate the purchase of 6,000 additional sheep and goats without subsidy. So this intervention contributed to a 10% increase in the average sale price for sheep and goats in the target market. The second response intervention was stimulus package for micro, small, and medium enterprises. These enterprises, because of lockdowns, which led to movement restrictions, increased transportation costs, and decreased demand for all kinds of goods and services, somewhere in the verge of minimizing their business. So by carefully identifying and selecting those enterprises which are highly impacted by the pandemic, this was done in very close collaboration with the local government. So we were able to identify 225 COVID impacted enterprises, as well as 94 flood affected enterprises, whereby in collaboration with local microfinance institutions, at 200 USD support, which is close to 8,000 local birr, were provided to the enterprises through the local institutions, where they were able to open saving accounts, which there was no existence before. So the third intervention is the stimulating entrepreneurship for COVID-19, as well as promoting COVID-19 prevention behaviors. So by closely working and collaborating with women and youth owned enterprises, we worked to facilitate the mass production of 1,200 face clothes or face masks, as well as 130 hand washing stations and mass social behavior change communication materials, around 17,000 SBCC materials through TV, radio, and public announcements. These were the major response interventions that we implemented during the pandemic. So I can say during 2 to 3 months response time, it was successful despite all the challenges that I will mention in a while. it was very successful to implement and actually reach our targets of stimulating the offtake of 5,000 small ruminants, 319 enterprises, as well as the production of hand washing stations and face masks. Next slide, please. Even if the nature of the COVID-19 crisis is unique, even if Mercy Corps had that experience of responding to shocks, the fact that the crisis was global restricted fund allocation, as well as the pace that we were implementing the response activities, which were relatively slower because of movement restrictions. There were definitely lessons that we have learned, even if there was a strained government relationship, because by the time we were implementing these response activities, we were also preparing to sign our regional agreement. So the government had a hard time aligning both the humanitarian response as well as the regular agreement signing. The scaling back response intervention was also another challenge. If it was with the crisis modifier, we would have been able to facilitate household cash transfer as well as a more scaled livestock and nutrition and sanitation activities, but because of limited resources, we had to scale back. But as I said, there are unique lessons with respect to using redirection versus a crisis modifier. And the fact that these responses were integrated, as I mentioned earlier, the livestock response intervention, the diversified economic opportunities, and the nutrition response, it really allowed to use the limited resources very effectively, as well as with limited human resources. During this intervention response, we did not hire additional team member. We used with the team that we have. So the fact that the responses were integrated really allowed us to deliver on time as designed. As I tried to mention frequently, so program in shocks and stress-prone areas, they need to inherit adaptive management to be able to respond to new information and conditions. Just few final words. So in order for us to really navigate this change and help us to make decisions quickly, so the communication that we made, which are very timely and as frequent as needed with the donor, was very critical. Yeah. So that's my presentation. Thank you so much for your attention. Any questions, you are most welcome. Thank you.
Good morning. Good afternoon, everybody. I know that you can see me.
Yes, we can see you well, Nestor. You look
okay.
great.
Okay. Today, I want to share with you some of the lessons that ADRA has collected in terms of how to do a remote pod distribution monitoring in different countries in Middle East and Latin America, and at least one country in Africa. Next slide, please. So the objective of the section is that we will learn some of the challenges that we got doing remote pod distribution monitoring. And also we're going to review some of the lessons from the adaptation that we have done. And also we are going to explore some recommendations for conducting remote PDMs. And next slide, please. Before going to into the lessons and the adaptations, I would like to mention that ADRA had been using PDMs to collect process indicators like satisfaction, security issues, things about the actual distribution, but also we have been used to collect outcome indicators data like food security indicators, wash indicators, and also some of the nutrition indicators in different timing. we have using the PDMs in the frequency about 2 or 3 weeks after each distribution happened. Yeah, that is, next slide, please. Some of the activities that we have done to collect the PDM also include distribution of NFIs related to shelter, settlements, continue please, hygiene promotion, wash non-food items, and also food kits. Next slide. Some of the modalities that ADRA has used to implement these activities was through food vouchers, electronic vouchers, like in the case of Brazil and Colombia and Yemen. And also we have distributed in-kind hygiene kits, like in Venezuela, also in Colombia, and also food kits, again, like DRC and Venezuela. Some of the adaptations that we have done in the PDMs, at the beginning, as I'm quite sure every organization has been doing, is face-to-face. But one of the first adaptations that we have done is try to do telephone service, where we have different modalities where people were using, calling the people and using the questionnaire and the paper, filling out. But in other countries, they were using Kobo tool, doing the phone survey using Kobo tool to fill out directly the survey. Also, we have used WhatsApp groups where we have distributed the link with the questionnaire, and the beneficiary has filling out the link, either web link or also Kobo tool link. Continue, please. Also, even that we have changes to remote data collection, but also there were some places in remote areas like Yemen and also sometimes in Syria that people don't have very low coverage of telephone and also internet, and also electricity outbreaks was an issue. So we need to do some reduced face-to-face interviews, but with very strict protocols in terms of COVID. We reduced the home visit, but also even the questionnaires were adapted. We are reducing the number of questions in the way that we can reduce the time spent in the households to collect the data. Also, we want to mention that the data that was collected through the PDMs had been used also to specific make changes in the program. For example, in one case in Venezuela, people through the PDM say that the beans that they have been receiving were too hard and they cannot cook it. So with that feedback, we come back to the supplier, and the supplier changed the brand, and then we distribute it again. And then in the following PDM, people were happy about that. And the same also was with some nappies that were distributed for children, again in Venezuela. And through the PDMs, people mentioned that some children having some allergies. And then again, we went to the supplier and discussed with them and changed the brand and changed again all the nappies, giving again replaces to the people that has complained. And in that way, the people were happy, and in the following PDN, we didn't have that problem. And I can continue with other examples. And another case where lack of training on some of the enumerators, because when we asked people that if they knew what was the actual number of items that we were receiving in the food kit, some people, they don't know. So for us, it was important they know how many items they should receive before even they come to the distribution side. So we realized that through the PDMs, and then we reinforce the training to the staff, and in that way we continue doing the changes on the program. Continue, please. As you see this slide, you can see in the right side how PDM was done before COVID, and then how it was switched. In the left side, you can see people in front of the computer, how it was switched to do the PDMs through Phonebased, and also filling out directly in the software in Cobol tool. Next, please. Some of the limitations that we have in the adaptations on the PDM, specifically at the beginning, it was unstable and an unavailable technology, phones and phone networks. There was a big challenge, for example, in Yemen, when we tried to do the first phone-based PDM, we only have 10% coverage on telephone, and then the response was very, very low. So we decided to go back to do face-to-face PDMs, but we have to train people on COVID protocols and also provide them with the equipment and social distancing. Also in other places was telephone that was there, but very unstable, like in case in Venezuela. People were doing during the interview, the phone call just finish, and then we have to try it again and again. So that was a big challenge. Also, some limited access required to technology like WhatsApp, because we were doing also WhatsApp groups, but in some places people don't have access to WhatsApp because internet is so weak that even WhatsApp was not working. And as I mentioned, another limitation is that when we are doing through the phone, we have to, it's very lower verification and some response rates. When we send the link, there was low response rates, but that is why we have to increase the sample. It means not the sample, sorry, but we increase the number of people that have to be contacted. So in that way that we can reach the sample size that we have been estimated for those cases. And again, there are some problems, like in Venezuela, we have to verify the quality of the water. So in that case, it's so complex to do that through the phone. So we have to do in person again with limited visitors. And sometimes also like people before the pandemic, we have a lot of contact with them, a lot of interactions, and they were used to that. And then when we turned to remote and phone-based service, they was like, they missed that one. They were missing that, was complaining that they want to have that interaction. That was something important for us to meet, that people, even then, they were even expecting more interaction. And they said when this crisis finished, they would like to come back to have that interaction directly with other personnel. Next, please. Okay, some of the recommendations that we can mention to do this adaptation is, first of all, because of the crisis, integrate into the activities of the program, and including PDM, the COVID education activities, because if people understand the challenges of working through in the context of COVID-19, if they understand that, they will collaborate when we ask them to comply with those protocols. Continue, please. Also, especially when we're working with mobile people like immigrants, Venezuelan immigrants in different countries in Latin America, it's very difficult to contact them because they tend to change telephone, they change location. So what we did is we recommend, and what we did is give advance warning of the remote, when the remote PDN is going to happen, and also setting the timing and telling them how long it's going to be and the date. So in that way, they can find a place where they can have a strong signal so that the telephone call is not dropped at the time when we're doing the interview. Next. And as I mentioned before, we need to select more people that the sample size so that we can reach the sample size. Just to give an example, we were doing in Yemen, we have to collect 600 people, and then the sample was 600 people, but we have to contact about 1,500 in order to get the 600. And also, what is key is the data quality. We, on a daily basis, the teams were looking at the quality of the responses, to see if all the questionnaires had been completed and if there is any contradictory responses so that they can change. So controlling the quality of the interviews, even the remote interviews that we're doing with Kobo Tool, checking on a daily basis has been is a good way to keep the quality of the questionnaires. And also is the flexibility. Flexibility in two senses. Flexibility in being willing to change not only to remote, but also when remote is not possible, to still have the questionnaires face-to-face. But even when you do on a face-to-face, we do the modifications in the questionnaire, like reducing the number of questions, just focusing on the main questions that we need to collect. And in that way, we reduce the time spending at the household, but also flexible, that we know that through the phone service, there is some kind of bias that we have to rely on the respondent because we cannot verify. So we need to be flexible in maybe getting less quality, but at least we can track the intervention. So we will recommend that things. Next, please. Some of the promising practice that we identify is contact people, collect the details of the contact people at the registration as much as you can, and also telling them that during the distribution, if they are changing telephone numbers, if they're changing location, that they can continually update those information so that when you do the PDM through Phonebased, you can get them one. Advanced notification also, like 1 week before doing the PDN, we call people and say, this is the day that we are going to do. We are going to do the survey so that they can be prepared. Continue using the WhatsApp groups with survey link. Include open-ended questions in the PDM questionnaire so that people can express, and more we can have qualitative data to help induce some of the decision making for adapting the program. And also, even after COVID-19, we can continue doing a mixing methodology post-COVID-19 using electronic data collection, but also face-to-face data, and included also focus group discussions, because people, as mentioned, they were just missing that connection with the team. With the team, so that they can express their concerns, and also it seems that through that contact, they feel the team is accompanied them in these problems. Next, please. This is what I want to mention and want to share with you. Thank you. Do you have any question? Just let me know.
Excellent. Thank you, Nestor, and thank you, Mahlet. Well, we are now going to move on to the question and answer session. My name is Piers Bocock, and I have the good fortune of working with the Ideal activity. So I'm going to be reading out questions that have been submitted, and will facilitate responses and possibly a bit of dialogue until about 5 minutes before the top of the hour. As a reminder, I'd like to encourage all attendees to post your questions in the Q&A box, which you can find at the bottom of your screen. Please don't include your questions in the chat box. Any questions we do not get to by the end of the session will be included in a question and answer document shared after the session. You can also upvote questions in the Q&A box you would like us to answer by clicking on the little thumbs up icon. So to begin, I'm going to use my facilitator's prerogative to ask a grounding question. And I'm going to start with Mahlet, and then I will pose the same question to Nestor. So Mahlet, thank you for your lightning talk and what you shared with us all. And as a reminder, these two lightning talks were selected because they were related to navigating decision-making with uncertainty during the COVID-19 pandemic. Can I ask you in 1 to 2 sentences to state the 1 or 2 most significant factors that contributed to you being able to navigate adaptive decision-making during the uncertainty of COVID-19?
Thank you so much, Piers, for that question. The fact that for the case of Ripa, the fact that we had crisis modifier planned or embedded within the project design, it gave us the fact that we were able to quickly step up and design. And even if without the availability of crisis modifier, we were able to ask redirection because there was budget flexibility. So as I said, based on the previous prime experience as well as Ripa, so the budget flexibility was a huge opportunity that the donor allowed us to adaptively manage. So this is part of the adaptive management, that budget can be utilized flexibly between budget line activities, but it has to definitely be with prior donor approval. But yes, the budget flexibility and the fact that we had frequent and timely communication with the donor, it really allowed us to respond adaptively. Maybe as I also tried to mention across the lessons part, the fact that integration came at the forefront for the program implementation, it does not only fix us to think of 1 or 2 intervention ideas, but rather to do it in a more integrated manner. So it really allowed us for quick decision-making as well as adaptive management. Yeah. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Mahlet. Nestor, now the same question to you. In 1 to 2 sentences, what would you say are the most significant factors that contributed to being able to navigate adaptive decision-making during COVID-19?
I think the most important for us is that actually using the data that has been collected through the PDM to make decisions on the change that we need to do in the program. Like I mentioned, those cases in some of the Latin American countries that some of the products were not okay. So we discussed with supplier, we replace things, and then we improve the quality of the product, and also improving the training of program people. So I think the use of the data of PDM has been for us the key for making the decisions in the program.
Excellent. Thank you, Nestor. Okay, so now we're going to go to some of the questions that people have posted in the Q&A box, and I'm going to start with a question for Mahlet from Lloyd. And he says, this seems to be an especially expedited process from the rapid market assessment and analysis to the response interventions. Did this present any internal issues? For example, leadership, approval, capacity, etc. Mahlet.
Yeah, okay. For sure, I mean, there has been issues. First, the timing also was an issue because it was just by the time we started to implement Ripa that COVID happened. So there were issues in terms of, the amount of budget that we also initially requested to the donor. But by the time we were able to, start our market assessment, the fact that we were able to coordinate with existing projects in the field, for example, in Somali region, it really allowed us to make use of time as well as team members. So there were issues, but we were able to work jointly with existing projects within Mercy Corps in the same region that allowed us to leverage on team members as well as, approvals. When it comes to processing, because it also has procurement requests. So we had, there was a time that we need to sit together with the procurement team so that we also had to plan our procurements because we had to call for microfinance institutions, we had to call for livestock traders. We also had to call for, enterprises who would be producing the face mask as well as the hand washing stations. So we were able to coordinate with our support team, finance as well as procurement, both at the head office level and also in the field office level. So we were able to mobilize team members to locations where the responses were more intense. But the fact that it was well communicated with the country director, the director of programs, as well as the chief of party and the key personnel within the project. And at least the bi-weekly update that we were having with the donor, it really helped to fast track the implementation. But otherwise, as you said, definitely it was challenging and there were issues, but the frequent communications really helped us deliver on time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mahlet. One of the things that I think came across to a lot of people listening to your lightning talk was the fact that you were just kicking off this effort 1 month into it when COVID-19 struck. And what was also, I think, impressive to a number of people and why this session was selected was that you chose a market-based approach that actually addressed the challenges that people were facing as a result of COVID-19. And I'm curious, just as a follow-up question to this rapid adaptation, how much your learning from the previous project impacted your ability to make swift decisions in partnership with the funder?
Yeah, definitely the fact that Ripa was a predecessor of Prime, it really helped for the ongoing strong relationship and engagement that we had with the donor. Even if the time was short for us, and we had that opportunity at least to have a co-creation workshop before we finalize the agreement signing. So the donor gave that flexibility and timing to actually go to the regions and do a co-creation workshop. So during that co-creation workshop, we were able to invite those private sector actors, local government institutions, to be part of that co-creation workshop. So during that, we were able, that really leveraged us like as a transition between Prime and Ripa, help us to build and also nurture the relationship that we had with the local actors as well as the local government. So that gave us a window of time for relationship building. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Mahlet. Nestor, I'm now going to turn to you. That there are two questions that we have here that I think relate to each other. The first is, I'll read them both. What are specific challenges you faced while conducting phone-based interviews? And then the second related one, did you sense any levels of inconsistencies due to remote PDM? In other words, were participants truthful? Did you have PDM indicators that required observations? If so, how did you handle that? Over to you.
Okay, and first on the challenges, I said there are two types of challenges. First with the beneficiaries and challenges with your team. And I start with the challenges with the beneficiaries. Basically, one of the biggest challenge was access to technology. So there are people that in remote areas, as I mentioned, in Syria or in Yemen, they don't have telephone. And if they have telephone, some of them, they don't have access to internet. Access to internet is very weak. But also, on top of that, in some areas in Latin America, telephone connection is very weak. So when we were in the middle of the interview was dropped, and we have to reconnect again. And so that has increased the time on the interview. And also other of the challenges, specifically in some areas in Latin America, people keep changing the telephone number so that when we called them, we couldn't find them. And then sometimes they gave us a number, but it was not actually their own telephone, that it was a friend of them or a relative. So when we call that telephone, the person was not there and they have to go and look for there. So that increased the timing on that one. So that on the sides of the beneficiaries. On the side of the team, again, the challenge was training, because at the beginning when we started doing the phone-based interviews, there were some inconsistencies in the way people were collecting the data. Some of the responses were inconsistent. So we have to retrain people in the use of the technology so that they can actually collect. And so the key was on a daily basis, review the questionnaires to see the consistencies. Then when talk about if we have indicators that require observation, in our case, one of the indicators that required observation was we have to collect the quality of the water in one of the countries. So definitely that one, we have to do it in person. But again, with a very clear protocols, the people, our staff cannot go into the house. We instruct the beneficiary to bring a glass of water from the container that they have, so that we can do the test. And that way we adapted in that way. And also there was a question and they said if they were truthful. And again, I think we know that it's going to be biased when we do a survey through the phone, because we cannot verify. When we do face-to-face interview, we can see the person, we can see the eyes, there are techniques, you can see if they are telling you the truth, you can observe other body language that can help you. But through the phone, you don't have that. So there is some bias, but we need to be flexible, because it's better to have something that is less quality than having nothing. And I think that answered the questions. I think.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Just one thing. Even if we do face-to-face, the questionnaire still, you can reduce the number of questions so that you can spend less time at the household level.
Thank you very much, Nestor. And if people have follow-up questions, please do feel free to type them into the Q&A and we'll make sure they get answered. The next question I have is for Mahlet, and it comes from one of a colleague in Ethiopia, is how was the government's response on how you navigated the emergency and development nexus? It's a big question.
Say that again, please, Pierre.
So the question is, what was the government's response as you navigated this shift in the program in the face of COVID-19 towards this market-based response?
Okay, so yeah, so it was challenging at first, even at some points, it still is. The fact that we had the crisis modifier activity or a streamlined budget was also a bit of a challenging or a dialogue between the project and the local government. In that we had to explain in terms of the process what it entails and when that will be activated. So definitely it was very challenging at first, but when they were able to demonstrate and when we were able to implement and when they were able to see the type of interventions that we engaged in, as well as how we engaged the local market actors, and we were able to reach scale within a short period of time with the limited resources. Yes, they were convinced, but as I said, it is very challenging given most of the interventions that are being implemented in this local context, given the drought-prone or the shock and stress-prone locations. The expectations always are to, do direct delivery. But the fact that the evidences that we have built on from Prime, as well as the design that we included the market actors as part of the direct program implementers, they were convinced to take that. But it is challenging. It's still challenging in some locations. Not in all locations they are convinced.
Thank you, Mahlet. The next questions I'm going to put, they're related. I'm going to put them to Nestor. And the primary question, this is a really fascinating one. Since people with access to phones are often better off than those without access, does conducting phone-based monitoring skew data to be more positive than the food security situations might actually be? Is there a way to control for these potential results?
Okay, this is a very interesting question. I just want to mention that the PDN were beneficiary-based survey. So saying that, it means that at the beginning, we did a screening and with criteria of selecting the beneficiaries that comply with the selection criteria for the program, which include different criteria like people, women, head and household, people with disabilities, children under 5. So having all those criteria and selecting all those beneficiaries, including those criteria, so that ensures you that when you do your PDM, you are not doing to everybody. It means that is what we have, even those challenges that people don't have telephone and they have to give the telephone from their relatives. So we are quite sure that the result that we got, it was actually for the beneficiary that actually were needing the the intervention. And the results on the food security at the beginning was very low, but there had been a process. We have seen the food indicators had been increased. That could be a bias there, totally true, but I'm quite sure that it's not the better off that we are benefiting with the programs. I don't know if that answered the question. And I just say, in order to not to have that problem that is mentioned in the question, is to do a good selection of your beneficiaries.
Excellent. Thank you, Nestor. And I think this is the kind of question that folks are facing across the sector. We have a lot of great questions, but we've reached the end of our live Q&A session time. So I'm going to turn it back over to Laura, but just with the notation that we will be sharing out responses to the questions from today's lightning talk presenters. And thank you all very much, and thank you for the questions and your responses.
Great. Thank you so much, Piers. And thanks so much, Mahlet and Nestor. It was really great to hear from both of you. So as Piers mentioned, we're just about at time for this session. But before we end today's lightning talk, we would love to hear your feedback. So if you can please take a moment to complete our very brief evaluation that my colleague Kim just dropped in the chat box, that would be much appreciated. We'll be using this feedback to help improve sessions throughout the rest of the week. Also, as mentioned, you will be able to access a recording of this session, the PowerPoint slides, and a document with the answers to the questions at a later date, once we have a few days to get all of the materials together from this event. So just wanted to say a final thank you so much for attending today's session, and an especially big thank you to Mahlet and Nestor for those terrific presentations. We encourage you, of course, to attend other sessions for the Food Security COVID-19 Learning event. And you can access the agenda here in the chat box. So thanks so much. Hope to see you throughout the week, and have a wonderful day or evening.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Thank you.